Based on what we've learned so far, what's most alarming to you about this?
In the affidavit, we learned that they had actually constructed an explosive device which they wrapped in shrapnel and were able to explode to test its effectiveness. So that's very alarming, particularly when you view that alongside the fact that they had identified the governor's vacation home as the weak point in her security profile. And the planning was so sophisticated that they had talked about and had scouted out locations for planting alternative bombs that would be used to draw law enforcement away from the governor's residence so they could execute their scheme. This shows a level of sophistication in planning probably consistent with military backgrounds, maybe law enforcement backgrounds. We'll learn more about that in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, and Joyce, how do you prosecute a case like this that involves so many people, but also a growing movement?
The most important thing in a prosecution like this is deterrence. You have to make it clear to other people who are concerned, who don't like trends in modern civil society, that their response must be a civil one, that it cannot be a criminal one. And so the most important thing that the Justice Department expresses, typically with statements from its leadership, which have not happened in this case, is how unacceptable the use of violence is. You know, we express our political views in this country at the ballot box, not with bombs. And so what we'll see will be a prosecution of these individuals. It looks to me as though the evidence is very good based on what we've seen so far, but they'll challenge it. They'll say that this was more fantasy and more locker room talk rather than an explicit plan, but it looks like the evidence here is pretty solid. The question will be whether the Justice Department, with this leadership, with a president who condemned Governor Whitmer even as this indictment was issued, whether they can somehow muster the ability to express to groups like this group that they must not engage in further violent conduct or they will face serious consequences.
And the question also is whether law enforcement are actually going to go after many people like this and whether they could be sympathetic to these extremists. Take a listen to what one Michigan sheriff had to say about the arrests.
It's just a charge, and they say a plot to kidnap. And you got to remember that, are they trying to kidnap? Because a lot of people are angry with the governor, and they want her arrested. So are they trying to arrest, or was it a kidnap attempt? Because you can still, in Michigan, if it's a felony, you can make a felony arrest. It doesn't say if you're in an elected office that you're exempt from that arrest. So I have to look at it from that angle, and I'm hoping that's more what it is. In fact, these guys are innocent until proven guilty, so I'm not even sure if they had any part in it.
Joyce.
The sheriff sounds a lot more like a member of one of the militias than he sounds like a member of law enforcement in that segment. And look, Candace, there's an ideology out there that's espoused by groups like the Sovereign Citizens and others that advocates for these so-called citizens' arrests. Don't try that at home, folks, because particularly when you're talking about not arresting a governor, but kidnapping her and you've got bombs on hand and violent ideation, this is not something that any sheriff should be encouraging, and this sheriff should certainly face a challenge in his next election, if not sooner.
A law enforcement person
didn't read the indictment. Joyce Vance, thanks for joining us. At least you read the indictment.